Andrew had always loved the idea of spending a weekend in a remote cabin with friends. So, when his childhood buddy Mark suggested a getaway at Pine Ridge Cabin, he eagerly agreed. Nestled deep in the woods and miles from civilization, the cabin was the perfect spot for a relaxing, tech-free weekend. Mark and Andrew were joined by their friends Sarah, Jessica, and Luke. The group had known each other since high school, and despite their busy adult lives, they had managed to stay in touch. This trip was a much-needed break from their stressful jobs and daily routines. They set off early on Friday, packing their SUV with food, drinks, and games. The drive to Pine Ridge took longer than expected, thanks to the winding roads and dense forest that seemed to swallow the sunlight. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting, casting an eerie orange glow over the cabin. "Wow, this place is really out there," Sarah said, looking around at the thick trees surrounding them. "That's the point," Mark replied with a grin. "No distractions, just us and nature." As they unpacked, Andrew felt a chill in the air. The cabin was old and creaky, with a musty smell that hinted at years of abandonment. But Mark assured them it was just rustic charm. After settling in, they built a fire in the stone fireplace and cooked dinner. The conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and reminiscence. Jessica, ever the storyteller, began sharing urban legends and spooky tales. "Have you guys heard about the Pine Ridge murders?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "No, but I have a feeling you're going to tell us," Luke said, rolling his eyes good-naturedly. Jessica launched into the story of a family that had been murdered in the very cabin they were staying in over 30 years ago. According to the legend, the father had gone mad and killed his wife and 2 children before hanging himself in the attic. "People say you can still hear the children crying at night," Jessica finished, her voice low and dramatic. "Nice try, Jess," Andrew said, trying to sound unimpressed. But he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling her story had planted in his mind. That night, Andrew found it hard to sleep. Every creak and groan of the old cabin seemed amplified in the silence. Just as he was drifting off, he thought he heard a faint sound, like a child's whisper. He sat up, heart pounding, but the sound was gone. Telling himself it was just his imagination, he finally fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, the group decided to explore the surrounding woods. They spent the day hiking, fishing, and enjoying the fresh air. But Andrew couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Several times, he thought he saw movement out of the corner of his eye, but when he turned, there was nothing there. Back at the cabin, Sarah found an old journal tucked away in a drawer. It belonged to the previous owners, detailing their life in the cabin. The last entry was chilling. "He's coming for us. We can't escape." "Probably just someone's idea of a joke," Mark said, though he looked uneasy. That night, the strange noises returned. This time, everyone heard them. Footsteps echoed in the hallways, doors creaked open and shut, and faint whispers filled the air. Jessica's story seemed less funny now. "Maybe it's just the wind," Luke suggested, but no one seemed convinced. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Andrew and Mark decided to investigate the attic the next morning. Armed with flashlights, they climbed the narrow stairs. The attic was dark and cluttered, filled with old furniture and boxes. As they searched, Andrew's flashlight beam fell on a large, dusty trunk. Inside, they found old family photos and letters, along with a newspaper clipping about the Pine Ridge murders. The article confirmed Jessica's story. The father had indeed killed his family in a fit of madness. But there was more. Tucked inside the trunk was a worn, leather-bound book filled with strange symbols and cryptic writings. It looked like some kind of diary, detailing the father's descent into madness. According to the diary, he believed he was being haunted by malevolent spirits that drove him to commit the murders. Andrew felt a shiver run down his spine. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice trembling. Mark nodded in agreement. "Let's pack up and leave first thing tomorrow." That night was the worst yet. The whispers were louder, and the footsteps seemed to be right outside their doors. Jessica screamed, waking everyone up. She claimed to have seen a ghostly figure standing at the foot of her bed. Panic set in. They all gathered in the living room, too scared to sleep. As the night wore on, the haunting grew more intense. Objects moved on their own, lights flickered, and the temperature dropped dramatically. Suddenly, the front door slammed open, and a cold wind rushed in. In the doorway stood a spectral figure, resembling the father from the photos. His eyes were empty, and his face twisted in rage. "Get out!" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the cabin. Terrified, the group fled into the woods, not stopping until they reached their SUV. They drove through the night, not daring to look back. Days later, back in the safety of their homes, they tried to make sense of what had happened. They reported the events to the authorities, but without any physical evidence, their story was met with skepticism. Andrew couldn't shake the feeling that they had narrowly escaped a terrible fate. He researched the history of Pine Ridge Cabin and discovered that several other visitors had reported similar hauntings over the years. The place was infamous among locals, who believed it was cursed. Despite their terrifying experience, the group remained close. The ordeal had bonded them in a way nothing else could. They agreed never to return to Pine Ridge Cabin, but the memories of that weekend would haunt them forever. Andrew kept the leather-bound diary as a grim reminder of their encounter. Every now and then, he would read its cryptic pages, trying to understand the madness that had consumed the father. He never found any answers, but one thing was clear. Some places are better left alone. And as for Pine Ridge Cabin, it still stands, abandoned and decaying, a silent witness to the horrors that took place within its walls. Those who dare to visit speak of cold winds, eerie whispers, and the feeling of being watched. But few stay long enough to uncover its dark secrets.